Going to do something a little bit different this morning to get our minds in the right mood for the Lord's Supper. There was a book that was just published in November of this year by Shane Scott called Christ Before Our Eyes. It's 52 readings to draw closer to Christ at the Lord's Supper. And it's not just all 1 Corinthians. I mean, he's found things throughout the Bible that point back to the crucifixion, the sacrifice that he made for us, and that sort of thing. And I started reading it yesterday, and I thought I'd share just a little portion of it this morning to just show you his style of writing and also the message that he brings very well throughout this. Again, for those of you interested, it's Christ Before Our Eyes. As soon as I can get turned over there. There we go. In Luke chapter 23, verses 32 and 33. My glasses are going to have to work here. It says, 2 others who were criminals were led away to be put to death with him. And when they came to the place that is called the Skull, where they crucified him and the criminals, one on his right and one on his left. The setting of this first scene is the place that the New King James Version calls Calvary. But most other versions translate it as the skull, which is what Calvary means in Latin. It is an appropriate name for a site that reeks with death. Some people believe the hill was given this name because the very shape of the hill might have resembled a skull. Other people think it was given the name because of the remains of those who were put to death. Unsure of the specific reason for the name, it certainly evokes a sense of dread. It is an ominous name. Verse 33 reports that the method of Jesus' execution is what I think we would consider simple and very understated terms. It just simply says, there they crucified him. The original readers of this gospel would have no need for Luke to elaborate on exactly what that meant. Crucifixion was an all too familiar to the people who lived in the first century. They knew about the way that it forced a victim to stretch out in an agonizing position, making them struggle to breathe, writhe in pain, and do so in public on full and shameful display. Our American Constitution prohibits cruel and unusual punishment, but Roman law featured it. It was a way to send a message to those who were under the thumb of imperial Rome. If you dare challenge the rule of Rome, you will pay a terrible price. Excruciating pain and public humiliation. It is in the midst of that intense physical anguish that Jesus prayed, and Jesus said to the Father, Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do. Jesus began with Father. That is how Jesus taught the disciples to pray in Luke 11. That is how the people of Christ have prayed for centuries, addressing God as Father. This is normal to us and does not stand out as unique. But in the centuries before Christ, throughout the pages of the Old Testament, a careful search through prayers reveals that there is not a single instance of anyone addressing God as Father. There is something unique about Christians' prayer, a uniqueness made possible because of who Jesus is, the Son of God. That terminology is found in reference to other people in the Bible. Adam is called the Son of God, but Adam was not Christ. David and the kings who came after him are sometimes called the sons of God, but not even the great King David was as great a son as was the Christ. God called the nation of Israel his firstborn son, but not even the entire nation of Israel, with all of its collective accumulative glory, could ever compare to the one who is the Son of God. It is because Christ is the Son of the Father in a special way. It is the Word who is with God and is God, as we read in John 1:1. It is He who opened up an avenue to God for all of us. Israel could not do that. David could not do that. Adam could not do that. we should never forget how special it is for us to be able to pray to God as Father. I love what Paul says in Galatians 4:4-7. But when the fullness of time had come, God sent forth his Son, born of woman, born under the law, to redeem those who were under the law, so that we might receive adoption as sons. And because you are sons, God has sent the Spirit of his Son into our hearts, crying, Abba, Father. So you are no longer a slave, but a son. And if a son, then an heir through God. We can pray to God as our Father because we are his children. We are his children because the Son of God opened up that relationship for us. What we commemorate in the Lord's Supper is the specific work of Christ that made the avenue of prayer possible. In order for us to have this special relationship with God, the barrier of sin that existed between us and God had to be removed. The way that barrier is removed is through what Jesus prayed for, which is forgiveness. Father, forgive them, he says. Jesus practiced what he preached because in Luke's account of Jesus' great sermon in Luke 6, Jesus teaches this, But I say to you who hear, love your enemies, do good to those who hate you, bless those who curse you, pray for those who abuse you. Now Jesus is on the cross, loving his enemies and doing good for those who hate him. He is blessing those who curse him by praying for those who are abusing him. Jesus practiced what he preached, and he also prayed what he preached. Among the things Jesus taught his disciples to pray in Luke 11 is, Forgive us our sins, for we ourselves forgive everyone who is indebted to us. As Jesus prays to the Father, he also prays for those who are hurting him to be forgiven. That's not easy, even under the best of personal circumstances. It is not an easy task to pray for those who have hurt you. Remarkably, Jesus prays this prayer in the very throngs of the agony of death. He prays this prayer while he is being abused. While he prayed this prayer, there was a crown of thorns ripping into his scalp. When he prayed this prayer, there were spikes driven into his hands and feet. When he prayed this prayer, the weight of his body was pulling down and pushing him and pushing up on the nails. He was hemorrhaging when he prayed this. He was being humiliated when he prayed this. Nevertheless, he prayed it. Let us keep these thoughts in mind as we partake of the Lord's Supper at this time.